did the Monster Mash.
The Monster Mash.
Hey everybody, it's me, Peter. Welcome to part 2 on horror films. In the last episode I talked about people who don't like horror films because they don't like gore, and I also spoke briefly on people who don't like horror films because they don't like to get scared. If you didn't see that episode, go check it out. I'll leave a link to it down below in the description. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about people who don't like horror films because they don't find them scary. Now, I love horror films, but I do kind of understand where they're coming from. The first time I saw Carrie, up until the prom scene, it was kind of a cheesy movie. Don't get me wrong, I love Carrie, but with the exception of the prom scene, it is kind of on the corny side. But real quick, I'm going to go through a couple of modern horror films that I find really great. For instance, I really like the movie The Conjuring, and though it's not as well known, I actually really liked Oculus. And with the exception of 2 unnecessary, identical jump scares, I really enjoyed Sinister. And more recently, I enjoyed both It Follows and The Autopsy of Jane Doe. And though I hated Ouija, I really liked its sequel. I feel like all of these films would be really good picks for great horror movies, but none of them really left me with a sense of dread. I didn't dwell on these movies after I saw them, and so I wouldn't recommend them to somebody who doesn't get scared of horror movies. I would like to talk a little bit about some of the best horror movies ever made. Rosemary's Baby, Psycho, and The Exorcist. Rosemary's Baby is actually kind of more of a drama than it is a horror film. But there is one scene, and anybody who's seen this movie is going to know exactly which one I'm talking about. There's one scene that is absolutely terrifying. It's filmed like a dream state, and then slowly becomes very, very real. And it gives me chills every time I see it. Now, Norman Bates from Psycho is famously inspired by real-life serial killer Ed Gein. And though Ed Gein did much more horrific things than Norman Bates ever did, Psycho is still really scary. This film still managed to get people to avoid taking showers. And finally, The Exorcist. It deals with a lot of fears that people have. An invasive entity, loss of innocence, loss of control, loss of a loved one, violence, masochistic tendencies. All of this made all the more terrifying because it's happening to a child. In any list of horror films, The Exorcist is usually found at the top of this list. And yet, it's not the film that I'm going to pick. The film that I am going to pick has probably left me feeling the most dread after I finished it. I dwelled on this film a little bit harder than I did with any other horror film. Unfortunately, it does suffer from the same thing that Carrie suffers from. Until it starts to pick up a little bit, it is a little on the cheesy side. And then things start to happen. And then they kind of keep happening. And even after the movie's over, it feels like it's still kind of happening. If you want to watch a horror movie that's really going to scare you, then I'm hoping that this is the one to do it. The film I'm talking about is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a 1974 Tobe Hooper film written by Kim Hinkle and Tobe Hooper. You may recognize Tobe Hooper as the man who directed Poltergeist. Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was also inspired by Ed Gein. The horrific things in this film are a little closer to what Ed Gein actually did. As I said before, the start of this film is pretty corny, with some bad acting and a forgettable storyline. But if anything, I think that helps the harsh reality of the later part of the film. Once Leatherface comes into the story, the film is unforgivably terrifying, right up until the end. This film was also notorious for having an unforgivable filming environment for the actors and the crew. The famous scene where Leatherface is swinging the chainsaw around was because of how exhausted the actor was. Running around in his suit and his mask, he was suffering from heat stroke and started to swing the chainsaw around like a madman. Tobe Hooper also kept Leatherface away from all of the actors until the scene where they were supposed to see him for the first time, to keep their reactions more genuine. The film as a whole actually didn't have a lot of gore in it. It does a really good job of staying away from anything bloody, but it does feel like an incredibly bloody film after you've seen it, because of the way that it's shot and because of its subject matter. So if you don't like horror films because you can't take them seriously, I suggest you give the Texas Chainsaw Massacre a chance. And then get back to me in the comments and let me know what you thought. And if you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.